The lie didn't sound like a lie when I told it to myself. That's the dangerous part. It sounded reasonable. Calm. Mature. It sounded like something a sensible person would say in order to move forward instead of getting stuck in unnecessary doubt. I remember the exact sentence. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't even think it clearly. It was more like a feeling that settled into me and stayed. This is fine. I can live with this. That was the lie. At the time, it felt like acceptance. Like growth. Like letting go of unrealistic expectations. People talk a lot about learning to accept reality. No one talks about how often acceptance is just surrender wearing better language. I had reached a moment where something inside me was asking for honesty. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just persistently. A quiet internal resistance to the direction my life was taking. And instead of listening, I negotiated. I told myself I was overthinking. That everyone feels this way sometimes. That no life feels fully aligned. That discomfort is normal and wanting more is dangerous. I didn't realize I was teaching myself not to trust my own signals. The lie didn't change my life overnight. It didn't need to. It simply became the lens through which I interpreted everything afterward. Every doubt was dismissed. Every warning softened. Every inner protest reframed as immaturity. I built a life that made sense only if the lie was true. From the outside, it worked. I did what was expected. I followed a path that looked coherent. Predictable progression, reasonable compromises, no sudden turns. People felt comfortable around me because I didn't challenge anything including myself. They said I was grounded. I was numbed. The strangest part is how convincing the lie became over time. Repetition does that. The more often you tell yourself something, the more it starts to feel like truth, not because it is, but because it's familiar. Years passed without resistance. Or rather, resistance existed, but it had nowhere to go. I had already decided it wasn't trustworthy. Whenever discomfort surfaced, I silenced it with logic. Look at what you have. Look at how stable this is. Look at how many people would be grateful for this life. Gratitude became my gag. I stopped asking myself dangerous questions. Questions like, is this enough for me, or would I choose this if I were honest? Those questions felt irresponsible. Indulgent. I told myself that real adults don't constantly reevaluate their lives. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't being adult, I was being obedient. The lie protected me from conflict. From uncertainty. From the embarrassment of admitting that I didn't know what I was doing. It protected me from having to start over. And protection, when it lasts too long, becomes confinement. I noticed the consequences slowly. My reactions dulled. My days became interchangeable. I started living in maintenance mode, where the goal isn't growth or meaning, but avoiding disruption. I wasn't unhappy. That's what kept me stuck. I was comfortable in a way that required me to stay asleep. The first real crack appeared during a moment that should have been satisfying. I had reached a milestone I once believed would make everything feel worth it. People congratulated me. I accepted their words. I even smiled. And then, alone, I felt a wave of emptiness so clean it scared me. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Recognition. I realized that nothing about this moment felt like arrival. It felt like continuation. Like proof that the lie had worked exactly as intended. It had carried me forward without ever asking whether forward was where I wanted to go. That night, I stood in front of a mirror longer than usual. I didn't hate what I saw. I didn't feel dramatic. I just felt disconnected. As if the person looking back at me had been making decisions without consulting me for years. That's when another thought surfaced, quieter but sharper than the first lie ever was. What if this isn't fine? The thought frightened me. Because if it wasn't fine, then I had built an entire life on a compromise I never fully agreed to. And acknowledging that would require something terrifying. Honesty. I realized then that lying to yourself doesn't feel like deception. It feels like relief. Relief from the pressure of choosing. Relief from the responsibility of wanting something clearly. But that relief has a cost. Every year I lived inside that lie, my inner voice grew weaker. Not gone, just easier to ignore. Like a smoke alarm you remove the batteries from because the noise is inconvenient. I had become very good at functioning without listening. And the scariest part was this, I didn't know anymore how to tell the difference between peace and resignation. The lie had done its job well. It had given me a life that worked and quietly taken away my sense of ownership over it. I didn't know yet whether I would confront it or continue maintaining it. But I knew one thing with uncomfortable clarity. If I kept living this way, my life would never collapse. It would simply pass. And one day, far too late, I would understand that the most destructive lie isn't the one that ruins everything. It's the one that makes everything look acceptable while it slowly erases you. Once the question appeared, what if this isn't fine? It refused to leave. It followed me into ordinary moments and ruined them quietly. I could be making coffee, answering emails, listening to someone talk about their weekend, and suddenly feel the lie breathing behind everything I did. Not accusing. Observing. I began to see how deeply it had woven itself into my identity. The lie wasn't just a decision anymore. It was a posture. A way of standing in my own life without putting my weight on it. I had learned how to agree without committing, how to progress without choosing, how to speak without revealing anything that mattered. People mistook that for composure. I mistook it for safety. The hardest part wasn't realizing I had lied to myself. It was realizing how much effort I had spent defending that lie. I had built entire explanations around it. Stories about maturity, responsibility, timing. I could justify every step so convincingly that even doubt began to sound unreasonable. That's how lies survive, not by being loud, but by being logical. I noticed how often I corrected my own instincts before they reached the surface. A desire would appear, tentative and hopeful, and immediately I would dismantle it. Too risky. Too late. Too impractical. The voice that did the dismantling sounded like wisdom. It wasn't. It was fear wearing a diploma. The lie had also shaped my relationships. I gravitated towards situations that didn't require me to be fully present. I stayed where expectations were low, where my half-engagement passed as consistency. I avoided intimacy that might force me to be honest about what I wanted or didn't. I told myself I was protecting others from confusion. I was protecting myself from exposure. There was a particular moment that crystallized everything. Someone close to me asked a simple, dangerous question, "Are you happy?" Not rhetorically. Not kindly. Directly. I answered automatically. I'm okay. The moment I said it, I felt the lie harden. They nodded and moved on. The conversation continued. Nothing dramatic happened. But inside me, something cracked open. Because okay had become my default answer to everything that scared me. Okay enough to continue. Okay enough not to change. Okay enough to waste a life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed years in my mind, not looking for a single catastrophe, but for the accumulation of small evasions. I saw how often I had chosen the path that required the least self-definition. How often I had traded clarity for continuity. The realization came slowly, then all at once. The lie wasn't that my life was fine. The lie was that fine was sufficient. I had accepted a life that didn't hurt me enough to leave and didn't nourish me enough to stay awake. And I had convinced myself that this balance was adulthood. I started noticing physical symptoms I had ignored for years. The tightness in my chest when making commitments I didn't believe in. The exhaustion that came from days spent performing coherence. The strange irritability that appeared when someone else spoke with conviction. Conviction unsettled me. Because it reminded me of everything I had edited out of myself. The breakdown, when it came, wasn't explosive. It was quiet and humiliating. I found myself alone, staring at a calendar filled with plans I had agreed to and feeling an overwhelming urge to erase everything. Not to run away. To stop pretending. I realized that the lie had given me one thing I didn't know how to surrender: justification. As long as I believed this is fine, I never had to explain myself to others or to myself. The moment I admitted it wasn't fine, everything would demand re-evaluation. And that was terrifying. Because what if I had gone too far? What if the lie had shaped me so completely that there was nothing underneath it anymore? What if I tried to be honest and discovered that I didn't know who I was without the script? That fear almost pulled me back. The lie whispered again, softer now, "You've made it this far. Don't be dramatic. People depend on you. You can live with this." And that's when I finally understood the trap. The lie didn't need me to believe it was true. It only needed me to believe it was irreversible. I had confused longevity with legitimacy. I thought that because I had lived inside the lie for so long, it must be right or at least unchangeable. Time had become its strongest argument. I began to see how often too late was just another version of too afraid. That realization didn't give me courage. It gave me grief. Grief for the years I had spent maintaining an image of stability while quietly disappearing inside it. Grief for the conversations I never had. The risks I never took. The honesty I postponed indefinitely. But grief also did something else. It returned sensation. For the first time in years, I felt something clearly. Pain, yes, but also aliveness. The ache of recognition. The discomfort of truth landing without cushioning. I understood then that the lie had kept me safe from pain and from meaning. It had flattened everything into tolerable shapes. I couldn't go back to not seeing it. I couldn't return to the version of myself who believed comfort was enough. The dilemma sharpened into a single, unbearable question: if I stop lying to myself now, what will I lose and what will I finally have to face? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that continuing the lie would require constant maintenance. Constant silencing. Constant shrinking. Truth, whatever it cost, would at least be simple. I stood there, inside my own life, realizing that the hardest part of honesty isn't saying it out loud. It's accepting that once you stop lying, you don't get to hide from the consequences of finally knowing who you are and who you've been avoiding. I didn't confront the lie all at once. I let it collapse. That distinction matters, because collapse is quieter than confrontation. It doesn't require speeches or ultimatums. It happens when you stop feeding something that can't survive on truth. The first thing I did was stop repeating the sentence in my head. This is fine. I didn't replace it with optimism or courage. I replaced it with something smaller and far more dangerous. I don't know. Saying that to myself felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing how far the drop was. For years, the lie had given me a stable surface to stand on. Taking it away meant accepting uncertainty without a narrative to soften it. At first, everything felt worse. The numbness lifted and left rawness behind. Choices felt heavier. Days felt longer. I noticed how many parts of my life were built around avoidance rather than intention. Truth doesn't arrive gently when it's been delayed. I began to feel grief properly. Not dramatic grief, but a steady ache for the years I had lived in half-ownership. For the version of myself I had kept on hold. For the risks I had framed as impractical when they were actually necessary. That grief didn't ask to be fixed. It asked to be felt. So I let it. I didn't burn my life down. I didn't run away. I did something much harder. I started withdrawing consent from things that no longer felt true. Conversations I used to nod through. Plans I used to agree to out of habit. Roles I played because they fit the lie. People noticed. Some were confused. Some were uncomfortable. A few were irritated. The version of me that existed inside the lie had been predictable, accommodating, easy to place. My honesty disrupted that. I accepted being misunderstood. For the first time, misunderstanding felt cleaner than pretending. The most unsettling change was internal. Without the lie buffering everything, I had to make decisions without rehearsed justifications. I couldn't hide behind practicality or timing anymore. I had to ask myself what I actually wanted and sit with the answer even when it scared me. Some answers surprised me. Others disappointed me. A few forced me to admit that parts of my life weren't just misaligned, they were wrong for me. I didn't rush to correct everything. I learned to move slowly, deliberately, without the urgency that fear creates. I learned that honesty isn't loud. It's consistent. There were days I wanted the lie back. Days when the simplicity of "this is fine" felt tempting. The lie had been efficient. It made life manageable. It reduced friction. But it also reduced me. Once you know that, returning feels violent. I began to understand that the lie hadn't ruined my life by being false. It ruined it by being incomplete. It told me how to survive, but never how to live. It taught me endurance without presence. Letting it go didn't make my life easier. It made it mine. I started noticing my reactions again, real ones, not curated ones. Discomfort became information. Desire became a signal instead of a threat. Fear still appeared, but it no longer wrote the script. I stopped asking whether my life made sense from the outside. I started asking whether it made contact with me. Some losses were inevitable. Not everyone stays when you stop being convenient. Not every structure survives when you remove the lie that supported it. I mourned those losses honestly, without turning them into proof that honesty was a mistake. They were simply the cost of alignment. If I have one confession left, it's this: lying to myself didn't destroy my life overnight, it slowly made it uninhabitable. And stopping the lie didn't save me in a dramatic way. It gave me something quieter and more demanding. Responsibility. Responsibility for what I choose. For what I tolerate. For what I continue. That responsibility is heavier than the lie ever was, but it's also alive. If you're listening to this and telling yourself some version of "this is fine," I want to tell you you're wrong. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just survivable. But survivable is not the same as lived. You don't have to expose the lie publicly. You don't have to destroy anything immediately. You only have to stop repeating it to yourself. The truth doesn't rush. It waits. And when you're ready to hear it, it doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for presence. I lived inside a lie for years because it made everything workable. I stopped living inside it because I wanted something more honest than workable. I wanted my life to feel like it belonged to me. And now finally it does.